Okay, boxing fanatics, welcome to the 18th episode of the podcast. I'm joined once again by Mr. Oscar Pick. And Oscar, well, this Saturday we got, quite a big fight coming up, to be fair. Fabio Wardley finally has his homecoming at Portman Road in Ipswich against Justis Huni. Huni obviously is a late replacement for Jarrell Miller. Some would say very, very different and contrasting styles. But I think most would agree, quite a good replacement, good opponent considering it was on 5 or 6 weeks. What's your initial thoughts on this one?
Yeah, good replacement opponent. I definitely agree with that. And to be honest, I'm quite delighted to see that Jarrell Miller's not getting his opportunity because I think to myself, this guy in the past has failed multiple drugs tests. He's returned multiple sort of PEDs in his system. And yet you've got the boxing world that keeps sort of welcoming giving him these, lucrative opportunities. So I think, yeah, firstly, I'm glad that you got someone like Justice Huni who's stepping in, who's obviously got a clean slate in that sense. But yeah, obviously in terms of the style matchup, I think I remember we kind of spoke off camera last week, and you mentioned that you feel like Huni might be a little bit negative
Mm.
this Saturday, and you feel like he might try and sort of pickpocket, rounds here and there, not really assert himself. And to be honest, I'm kind of leaning towards that trail of thought as well. I think Huni is a decent fighter, but he's clearly got a ceiling. I mean, we all saw that Kevin Lorena fight
Mhm.
where it was a tough one for him. And obviously, Kevin Lorena is a solid guy, but he's no world beater.
Mhm.
You'd expect someone with a bit of talent to sort of come through Kevin Lorena quite comfortably. But yeah, obviously Huni struggled that night and he got clipped quite a bit. I think he got rocked actually, like a couple of
Mm.
times
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
But yeah, it's not particularly encouraging, when he's coming in. I don't know if that wasn't his last performance, but that's the one that kind of sticks in your memory. And then on the other hand, you got Fabio Wardley, who, is coming off that devastating first round stoppage victory over Fraser Clark. It's like, I mean, based on that, you'd obviously favour Fabio Wardley quite heavily, and I do favour him. I just feel like you know, with Fabio's style, how he's so explosive, he's so exciting. I'm just hoping that that's going to actually make for an entertaining fight because I agree with you. I think Huni might be a little bit sort of tentative, especially in those early rounds. He's not going to want to take too many risks, especially not having a full training camp either. So I'm just hoping that, Fabio Wardley's just natural athleticism and his explosiveness and that power is going to make for an entertaining fight.
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely. And a great point about Miller. I mean, boxing must be the one of the only sports where you literally fail a test and then you come back 6 months later and get an
Yeah.
even bigger opportunity offered to you, which is just ridiculous. And we don't even know why he's pulled out. We don't even know, like, it's not even been revealed yet, has it? So crazy. And yeah, I think Huni comes across as a nice guy. And look, if anyone's gonna get a good payday, I'm glad it's him. He seems like a nice guy and he's got a clean slate, like you said. But as for the fight though, yeah, I mean, it's somewhat like I said last week. I'm just not convinced of Hooney's dog. I don't know if he has enough dog in him to win this fight. That's what really just concerned me. When I've seen that fight against Lorena, really just I think it's a bit strong to say that it put a bad taste in my mouth, but it just was too negative. And I'm thinking, like, against someone against Lorena, you shouldn't really have to be like boxing on the back foot, like like really having to box like that. You should be dominating, really. I know that's maybe his style a little bit. So I'm just concerned in this fight that he's just gonna get outdogged by Fabio. You can say whatever you want about Fabio Wardley. He's a white collar fighter. He's a bit wild sometimes. He's got that super saiyan mode when he gets hurt and then he starts throwing punches crazy. But the guy is a natural fighter. He's someone who, yeah, you wouldn't want to. I mean, I'm sure he has had a lot of street fights in his day, and he brings that into the ring. But he's a dog in there, and in the heavyweight division. That goes a long way, I think. And yeah, just Huni. I just feel like I can see him just boxing on a back foot, trying to play it safe, maybe pot shotting here and there, and it's only a matter of time before Wardley really just catches him with a big right hand potentially. But I am hoping for a more competitive fight. I'm hoping that Huni actually asks some questions to Fabio Wardley, actually maybe stuns him, hurts him, gives him something to think about. So obviously we know Huni is a replacement. In your opinion, is Huni a tougher fight? We know stylistically it's a different fight because Miller, we know what Miller is. Miller would have just come forward, 300 pounds, like a tank, really, just coming forward, and a tank with an engine actually coming forward all night. And it would have been hard, I think, for Wardley to actually knock him out. Huni's obviously more of a boxer, more skillful, he's got the amateur pedigree. But what do you think? Is this a tougher fight for Fabio?
Um, I'm not sure it is a tougher fight to be honest, because and I did think that when it was originally announced, I thought, yeah, Huni, he's a bit more dynamic. He's got a bit more of a skill set to him. I thought, that is what's going to make it a harder fight. But now that I'm thinking about it, I think Miller purely just based on, his durability more than anything else, and the fact that, as you mentioned there, he marches forward. He's obviously got that gas tank, which I'm guessing he's just built up over the years with the PEDs that's been in his system. Because obviously, once you're taking PEDs, even if you come off, like he's built up that baseline sort of level of endurance, hasn't he? And I think we saw that in the Dubois fight. It's not like his output was tremendously high in that fight, but he was still plodding forward, applying that pressure. I think that's probably what would have made it a tougher fight for Fabio Wardley. Although you can make the argument that Huni, as I said, is a bit more technical.
Mhm.
Is sort of fundamentally a better boxer than Jerome Miller. I think just purely, the size, the durability, and that kind of pressure that Jerome Miller brings. I think that's what would have made it a tougher fight for Wardley.
Mhm, mhm. Fair enough. And I mean, the thing about the heavyweight division is like it's almost like a completely different sport sometimes. I feel like at the lower weight divisions, like skills pay the bills more at the lower divisions, if that makes sense. I feel like, yeah, when you got two welterweights or even two middleweights, more often than not, the more skilled fighters got to win. But we've seen so many times in a heavyweight division where one-trick ponies do really well. Like Wilder was the biggest one-trick pony going. Well, he's still fighting, but he's had a great career just from being able to land a big right hand. Miller, I guess, in some ways, he's also a bit of a one-trick pony. He's just someone who comes forward, he just comes forward relentlessly. And I feel like this might be a bit harsh on Huni, but he might be a bit of a jack of all trades but master of none kind of thing. It's like he's kind of, I don't know, average across the board, decent across the board, maybe good across the board, but I don't know, is that going to be enough to beat someone as doggish as Wardley, Um, so it's interesting. I mean, I think I agree with you. I think styles make fights, and I think Wardley actually would have been a tougher fight, or on paper at least. Remains to be seen. I just feel like because Wardley sorry, Miller. Miller is just, Wardley relies on his power, and I think it would have been very hard for Wardley to knock out Miller with one punch, just because how durable he is. And then it would have
Yeah.
got interesting because Miller would have kept coming forward. I don't think Huni has the same level of resistance as Miller, and I just feel like if Wardley lands, I don't know, Huni might go down. Huni might go down. What's the keys to victory for? Let's start with Huni because he's obviously the underdog here. What do you do if you're Huni in this fight? I mean, because let's be honest. Look, you're fighting in the guy's hometown. This is boxing. We're not gonna pretend here. If you're fighting hometown, you've got a big advantage. You're more likely to get the rub of the green on the judges' scorecards. Um, so with Huni, like it's almost, I'm just hoping he doesn't come to the fight and just box in the back for and be negative because he's not gonna get a decision like that, and he's not gonna, knock out Wardley like that. I don't think either. So what would you say? What's the keys to victory for Huni? What does he have to do to kind of to win basically?
To be honest, I'd like to see Huni mix it up on the inside a little bit because we all know Fabio Wardley has that knockout power. Like he's just got that natural strength about him, and he can switch his opponent's lights out just like that at the drop of a hat. But with Huni, in order to sort of negate that power and sort of nullify the leverage that Wardley can get behind his shots. I'd like to see him, sort of try and get in on the inside. Obviously, he's a shorter opponent anyway. He's a shorter fighter, so I'd like to see him getting on the inside and not just sort of use it as an excuse to, bide a little bit of time as like we see some fighters do. I'd like to see him be a little bit more clever in there, use his feet, sort of pivot around Wardley a little bit more, and maybe, press him up against the ropes and kind of be a little bit cuter in there.
Mhm.
Um, with Fabio Wardley, I think when you give him that space and that time, that's when he's most dangerous because he can set up these attacks and he launches, his bombs from quite a, far out of range a lot of the time. So if Huni can, sort of get engage with him at close quarters, let's say, and sort of use a bit of his technical skill in that sense, I think that would actually work quite well for him. But I don't see Huni really putting a dent in Wardley, to be honest. I don't think he's got, that kind of power. So I think ultimately it'll be a distance fight for him. And I think, if he can bank, you know, the odd round here and there by just sort of doing a bit more of the eye-catching work on the inside, then maybe that would be a
Mhm.
good sort of avenue for him. But as you say, he is an underdog in this fight for a reason.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just the more I think about this fight, the more I think Fabio Wardley has got him gunned down in quite a lot of the key departments, really.
Mhm.
As you quite rightly highlight there, Huni does not blow you away with any sort of performance, really. There's not like he hasn't got that X factor, that kind of one thing where you look at Huni and go, wow, like
Mhm.
that's really impressive. Whereas Wardley, like he does sort of captivate you in that sense. Like he does produce these really exciting performances. And it's
Mhm.
not like he's a worse technical boxer either. Like obviously we mention his white collar background all the time, but it's not like, he's completely flawed in
Mhm.
that sense. Like he's still obviously he's not an Usyk, but he can still hold his own, with his feet and stuff. So yeah, obviously, there is like a game plan there for Huni, but whether he can sort of execute that, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's a good point about Fabio Wardley, actually. He is actually technically better than we give him credit for. I like his feints, Wardley. He does a lot of good feints and he does set up his shots quite well. He's not like he's coming in there like, you know, just swinging for the fences. He does actually set up his shots quite well. So he is actually, despite his limited background, he's actually well schooled in a way, if that makes sense. And yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I'd love to see Huni put Wardley on the back foot, but I don't know if I've actually ever seen Wardley really on the back foot, to be fair. And I don't know if Hooney's going to be the man to do it. I mean, that would be some shock if Hooney was able to push Wardley back, come forward. I mean, he must have the skills. He's got the amateur pedigree. I think he's versatile enough, Hooney. I just don't know if he's like I'm not sure if he's courageous enough to do it to go into close quarters and just leave himself there. But like you said, I mean, if he comes close quarters, he might actually smother Wardley's work because, like you rightly said, Wardley actually likes a bit of space. So maybe getting close maybe is actually the best form of offense and is also the best form of defense, I guess, potentially. As for Wardley, is it fair to say in this fight that what I'm thinking is, I think the longer this fight goes on, actually, the better it is for Huni. I think Wardley, if I'm reflecting back on the first Fraser Clark fight, I feel like he did lose his explosiveness as the fight went on. So I guess if you're Hooney, is it fair to say that maybe you do want to just survive the first few rounds and then maybe you want to kind of ramp it up as the fight goes on because yeah, I don't think Wardley as explosive later on. So maybe that's when Hooney can actually start to yeah, ramp up the tempo a little bit. Maybe, start to unleash his own bombs. So that's a potential tactic. Survive the early rounds, and then when Wardley tires a little bit, then start to go for him, to go for him a little bit. What do you think about that? Do you think if it goes late, would you still favor Wardley?
I think I probably would, to be honest, but that's because obviously you quite rightly point out that, for a fighter of, I guess, Hooney's body dimensions and, what we've seen of him, his movement and stuff, like you'd think that would be a good game plan for him to kind of, let it go long and stuff. But I do think there must be question marks about Huni's gas tank because obviously I keep bringing up that Lorena performance, but I feel like there was some serious signs of fatigue in that fight. Like he was sort of trying to take a few rounds off in there. And I think when he's under pressure, he sort of really feels it in there. And you also quite rightly point out whether he's actually got that dog in him because he kind of there was a few distress signals, let's say that were being expressed by Huni in that particular fight, and you do question, with someone like Fabio Wardley, who's got a lot more firepower and is a physically more imposing guy as well than Kevin Lorena. You just think like can Huni deal with that for 12 rounds? I'm guessing it's a 12-round fight. It might be 10 rounds. Oh, well, it's for the WBA interim title, so
Yeah,
you're guessing it's 12 rounds.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I don't think Huni can survive that with being in there with Wardley for that long. So although I kind of say like, oh, his best chance is to kind of, as you say, smother the work of Wardley and stay on his chest and kind of nick rounds here and there. Having said that, I don't think I think that's still quite a dangerous strategy because at the end of the day, Wardley is going to catch him. Like if Kevin Lorena can hit you multiple times, like Wardley's definitely gonna, put a bit of a dent in him. And then it's a case of can Huni actually deal with that? How good's his chin? Because obviously based on that Lorena fight where he was, maybe rocked a little bit or stunned, someone like a Fabio Wardley who's a great finisher as well. We've seen that in recent performances.
Mhm.
I'm not quite sure if Huni could sort of survive that really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, I think. I mean, there's a reason Hooney's a big underdog in this fight. I think a lot of people are sharing the same kind of sentiments. But if we flick it back to Wardley, if we actually look at Wardley's resume, look, we've all been impressed by him. We all know he's brilliant to watch. We all know he has knockout power. He's very athletic. But when you actually look at his resume, to be fair, who is he actually beaten, really, when you actually look at his resume? And I think that's something we actually need to consider because Clark, on paper, is a good win because Clark is a bronze medalist. And look, I don't want to knock Clark too much. But, it's fair to say Clark wasn't really setting the world alight either when he first came into the scene in the pro ranks either. So I do think we need to take into account it as well a little bit because that's his best win. Let's be honest. The first fight that was the most vulnerable we've ever seen Fabio Wardley. He was hurt at times. I remember his nose. Remember his nose. His face was a bloody mess in the first fight, and he did look vulnerable a bit. And then in the second fight, obviously, he put everything to bed and destroyed Clark. But is it possible? That obviously that knockout was very emphatic. Do you reckon maybe, the emphatic kind of ness of that knockout, do you reckon that's kind of almost papered over the cracks a little bit? Because if you reflect back to the first fight, that wasn't Wardley's best performance, really. And if Huni can kind of at least kind of, I don't know, do what Clark did in that first fight a little bit and just kind of, make the rounds go on, be a bit awkward, land his own shots, maybe he does have a chance. What do you think about that? But I guess Wardley's resume and also, yeah, maybe we're not seeing the full picture, maybe.
No, I think that's a great point because people are now saying that Fabio Wardley's a top 10 heavyweight, but as you say, like who's he actually beaten to deserve that? Like Clark had done nothing as a professional. Like it's all well and good saying you beat an Olympic bronze medalist, but Clark had done absolutely nothing. And but then people are saying that Wardley's a top 10 heavyweight out of nowhere. I'm like, what the hell's going on there? But I do think with Wardley, I have always been quite impressed by him, to be honest. Like, even back when he only had a few professional fights, I don't know if you remember that fight he had in Matchroom's back garden, Eddie Hearn's back garden when they was staging the fights there. It was against Simon Vallily. I don't know if you remember, who's he's obviously a limited fighter. Like, he's not a great contender by any stretch of the imagination. But I remember seeing Wardley in there and just kind of, the eye test and and just seeing sort of how he went about his work. And I
Mhm.
remember being really impressed. But at the time, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, he's a white collar fighter. He's got no chance." I remember thinking, because you quite rightly point out the heavyweight division is unlike any other,
Mhm.
and even if you don't have that kind of seasoning, that amateur experience, or the kind of technical prowess, you can still really excel as a heavyweight. Based on your physical attributes and your heart and everything, which Fabio Wardley has all of that in an abundance. Like, so I think I've always thought that Fabio Wardley had a lot of potential, and I think he's showing that. But I do agree with you with the fact that I think people sort of need to, shake their heads a little bit in term like give their heads a wobble where they're now calling Fabio Wardley a top 10 heavyweight because
Mm.
he's not really beat that many great fighters. But yeah, with the Clark fight, the first one, I actually had Fabio Wardley winning that. That was just my opinion. I thought he won.
Mhm.
But yeah, I thought he showed enough in that fight. Like he showed more positives than negatives, I thought, just
Mhm.
in terms of his mental fortitude to kind of overcome those obstacles and kind of outlast Fraser Clark, or at least push him right to the brink. And I think that kind of put him in good stead, especially obviously in their rematch, where you can see that he's sort of gleaming with that confidence now. He knows that he can, if he's dragged into deep waters, that he can still swim,
Mhm.
and equally he can, get a knockout early doors if he really needs to, or if the opportunity presents itself. So I think that there's a lot to get excited um, for with Fabio Wardley, but as you quite rightly say there, whether he's a top 10 heavyweight at this stage, I'm not quite sure about that.
Mm. Great point, to fair. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the top 10 heavyweight was it's quite random. I don't know, it is quite random. I mean, time will tell, I suppose. Time will tell. Time will tell. I don't think he's had the victories to be a top 10 heavyweight, if that makes sense. I don't think he has the resume to be considered a top 10 heavyweight. But I think maybe he has the potential to be a top 10 heavyweight, to be a legit top 10 heavyweight. Because, like I said before, I think more than anything, I'm just really impressed with Wardley's dog in him. I don't think you can teach that. Honestly, I feel like you can be the most talented fighter in the world. But if you haven't got that resilience, you haven't got that dog in you, you're not going to go very far. And he definitely has it. I mean, and what I like about him as well, he's just likely he's going to go out on his shield. He's that type of fighter. If he's losing on the points, he's going to go on his shield, and that's another thing Huni needs to be aware of. Huni might be up on the scorecards. We never know. Who knows? He might do a boxing masterclass. But I'm sure Wardley's not going to stop knocking him out until the very last second of the round, which is something he needs to pay attention to. But yeah, time will tell if Ward is a top 10 heavyweight. Um, yeah, whatever happens, he's done amazingly well to have that limited experience. Um, what about this element of Queensbury versus Matchroom? Because I find it so fascinating how it wasn't that long ago when Eddie Hearn was literally in Wardley's corner. I think it was a fight by fight deal, but still, Wardley was literally with Eddie Hearn, and Eddie Hearn was high on him. And now we've got the complete reversal. I remember looking at the press conference, and you even had Dillian White. Dillian White's done so much business with Hearn over the years. Even he was on the other side of the table. And then obviously Wardley decided to sign with Queensbury, which you can't really blame because Queensbury's got all the heavyweights and stuff. What have you made of that dynamic, Queensbury versus Matchroom again? I mean, Warren and Hearn are like BFFs at the moment, to be honest, and they don't really dig into each other at all. But I mean, what do you make about that? Could that play into this fight a little bit? That Huni might have, I don't know, a bit more motivation from Hearn to get a win over Queensbury.
Well, I don't think Huni would be too bothered about it, but I do think with Hearn, like he wouldn't necessarily risk, one of his sort of real prospects, in a fight like this. But I think he's quite happy to chuck Justice Huni in there because I think deep down, obviously Eddie's signed him and maybe expected a little bit more of him, but I don't think Eddie Hearn really has that belief in Huni because it was not long ago where he was talking about chucking him in there with Moses Atalma. And
Hmm.
anyone who understands, a thing or two about boxing, wouldn't they? That Moses Tama would get rid of him in pretty quick fashion. And I think, Eddie Hearn would have known that. Like, but because Atama's a big name and he's a rising star, then you can kind of market that, and he might have got a few quid for it, or
Yeah,
like. So I think these promoters, they're very careful with how they match their real sort of talented prospects that they've got a lot of belief in. But I think with someone like Huni, Eddie Hearn probably just sees him as just another sort of contender, fringe, contender who he can just kind of use as. I don't. It sounds proper harsh, but like cannon fodder. You know what I mean. Like, obviously, Huni, like he's a decent enough fighter in his own right, but I don't think Eddie Hearn, has got much of a long-term plan for him, shall we say. I don't think he sees too much value there with Huni. So even if, it's another Queensbury win on the cards, I don't think Eddie Hearn will be particularly bothered about that.
that's very interesting to be fair. I didn't think of that to be fair. I mean, but what I would say to counter that is that who else has Hearn got at heavyweight, really?
Oh,
He's
at heavyweight, yeah, he's got no one really.
he's got Terramana Jr. coming through. He's got Anthony
Oh
Joshua
yeah,
in the latter stages. I think he's got one of the Perros. Has he got one of the Perro twins? He might do.
yeah, I think he has, yeah.
One of the Perro twins, and then he signed this new guy, I think Leo Atang, some
Oh
newcomer.
yeah.
But you're right though, to be fair. I mean, I don't know, but at the press conference, I don't know, it's interesting to say if he because what he said was very convincing. He said that Queensbury may have made a mistake here, by picking Hooney as the late replacement. That was his words. And it remains to be seen if that's the case. I mean, if you know, let's see if he's right or not. It could just be like you're saying though, that he's just selling the fight and maybe he deep down knows Hooney has no chance. We will see. We will see. All I can say is I'm really looking forward to this fight. All right, Oscar, let's give our predictions then to finish. So I'll go first. Um, Probably not surprised. I'm going to go for Wardley knockout. I'm not going to pick round because I don't want to have complete egg on my face if it doesn't go that way. But I think Wardley KO. I think it's quite a likely outcome. Yeah, simply just because. I just think Hooney's just too negative sometimes, and I think you can't be like that against Wardley. Wardley's going to catch you eventually, and I could just imagine Wardley landing a big overhand right. If Hooney proves me wrong, you know, all power to him. Seems like a good guy and a great big upset. What about yourself?
Yeah, no surprises here. I'm going to go with the exact same prediction. I'll give a round actually. For some reason, I got a feeling about the fifth round. I think
Oh,
Fabio Wardley will get him out of there. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But I was going to say, we should probably mention that it's quite likely that Fabio Wardley, if he does win this fight,
mhm.
I can see him fighting the winner of Pulev Hunter, which has just
Oh,
been that's just been, so the Don King of all people's won the purse bid for that fight.
oh yeah, oh
And
yeah.
yeah, I don't know when them two are actually going to fight, but I do think if Michael Hunter beats Pulev, which I think he will, I think Fabio Wardley against Michael Hunter, regardless of it being for that stupid WBA belt that no one cares about, I think that's still a really good fight, Fabio Wardley against Michael Hunter. So,
Yeah, yeah.
we'll have to wait and see if that materializes.
I mean, Hunter, to be fair, is a very talented fighter, but he's been so inactive, hasn't he? So
Yeah.
it needs to be seen. I mean, Pulev is ancient at this point, and Hunter's really inactive. So it really depends what. I think Hunter's going to beat Pulev, but I mean, it remains to see what he has left. Really. But anyway, so we're both going for Wardley knockouts. Let's see what happens. As always, guys, thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode, please like, comment, subscribe, and yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.